In this episode, we discuss a couple of things that stood out in the Dallas Cowboys documentary on Netflix, America's Team, The Gambler and His Cowboys. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man who, on any given Sunday, can make magic happen on a podcast. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, are you ready to show him how you fight for those inches?
Of course, man. Let's go.
All right. Now, before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe and like the show on YouTube or your podcast platform. Doing so really helps the show out. We're recording on August 26, 2025. And last week, Netflix released a new documentary focused on the NFL's Dallas Cowboys and their dynastic run in the mid-1990s and the cast of characters that really defined the organization at that time. Now, this era of Dallas Cowboys football was known at the time and since then to be a wild and compelling one. And this is a team that won championships, and they're known to be even more compelling off the field than on the field. So much so that there's already been a New York Times best-selling book written about the 90s Cowboys by author Jeff Pearlman, and the book was called Boys Will Be Boys. So there's some juicy stuff, when you want to look closely at the 90s Dallas Cowboys for a football fan and really for anyone, beyond a football fan. And I would say that the documentary did a solid job, of kind of taking us through the broad strokes of the arc of the franchise at that time. So to get us started, Tunde, what storyline in this 8-part documentary, America's Team, The Gambler and His Cowboys, really hit you the hardest or was most interesting to you?
Yeah, I would say, man, first of all, I'm not an avid football fan and regular watcher. So to me, this was great. Because there was a lot of information and stories that I just didn't know about. So
yeah,
it was very entertaining.
Just, I guess, kind of pull the curtain back a little bit. And you were the one telling me that I should watch this and we should do a show on it. And I was avid football fan at that time in the 90s. I'm less so now. I still follow it, but less so than at that time. I was every week watching everything and so forth. So it was interesting to me, you coming to me as a non-football guy, yo, man, we got to watch this. We got to do it. This is an interesting conversation.
Because in that period, NBA was my main thing. So I could tell you everything about the NBA in the 90s. But football, NFL, I can't. So that was, to me, a very enlightening and interesting. There's a lot of things I learned about not only the team of the Cowboys and the people that played it, but more of the essence, like you said, what was going on back then on and off the field. So I would say for me, man, and I appreciate the question because in preparing for today, I thought about it, and really it's Jerry Jones himself that really stuck out to me as, clearly he was the main character of the show in that way, but I think his story, just kind of the modern American arc, I feel like his story is very in line with that. Born in 1942, which is when we had already entered the Second World War. So kind of that was a very important period in forming a modern American culture. In fact, he was in Little Rock, Arkansas, at the high school that was at the center of integration battles in the 1950s, graduating college in 1965 during the height of kind of that era of cultural change between Vietnam, civil rights, feminism, all that. And then really his foray as an adult into being a risk taker, a very American kind of way of him getting into oil, the potential chances for boom or bust, him taking a huge loan to buy the Cowboys that could have gone the other way and his family would have been starving, but it didn't. And he kind of, not only did he hit an oil well, but he hit another in the business on the sports side with the franchise, he hit something as well. So, and then taking it all out to the interpersonal stuff that I know we'll talk about. So for me, just to finish a bit succinctly here, Jerry Jones really stood out to me.
That was
for more than just him being the main kind of character, it was kind of those parts of his journey.
Yeah. I would agree with you that he has a story, he has a story. And I would say that the documentary, the thing that stood out to me in the documentary was that, hey, there's a lot of Jerry Jones here. And then I've seen commentary and I'm like, yeah, this is really a Jerry Jones documentary. And because there's a lot about the Cowboys, that you could talk about that wasn't in there, even, in this era to some, and then also the history of the Cowboys. Why are the Cowboys America's team? That was not really touched on, in the documentary and so forth, just as far as picking it up. So it was really centered around Jerry Jones, which you can tell from the subtitle. It's called The Gambler and His Cowboys, so it's like, yeah, this is about Jerry Jones. But they did incorporate, they didn't hide all the warts, so to speak, and in fact, the warts are where a lot of that compelling stuff is. I would say that the thing that for me that was really very interesting to see, and to see in a documentary, because at the time, I was aware of this, but you don't get to see it from the same perspective when you're seeing, kind of the news stories, day by day or whatever, is just that, like, the role that ego played in, this, like, as a part of the story. And this is a spoiler alert. We're going to talk about, we're not going to go through everything that happened. It's 8 episodes. But one of the things that defined the era was when Jones bought the team, and they went to the bottom. They were at the bottom of the league shortly thereafter. They hired a new coach, Jimmy Johnson, who was coming from the University of Miami, which was a very flamboyant but a championship quality. But, they won a lot, and they let you know about it. And, and they were going to try to bring in a different type of culture with the Cowboys and so forth, get rid of the old kind of energy. And it succeeded, like Johnson and like as the coach, as, the head personnel guy, and then Jones kind of being there also. They went from the bottom to the top, and with that success, they immediately imploded, so to speak. Like Johnson and Jones, you're fighting over who did this, who was the one that should get credit for this. And so we hear about things like that, like, okay, yeah. Once you have success, I mean, we see, like, I think of like the music business, and, bands have success. And then, the people that, kind of drove the success start looking at each other like, man, this is my show, not your show. And so it kind of had that kind of a feel to it. And to see it again, play out in the documentary, and you're hearing from both of the guys, and then you're seeing, just other people talking about, that dynamic was very interesting to me, because it's such a human thing. Like, again, like you can see that in bands, you can see that in companies, just that, hey, we took it from the bottom to the top, and then now I hate you, and in fact, you're fired, and all this. Like, yo, wow. So that to me was very interesting, like to see that. And I knew it was coming. I knew that, they left on bad terms, and, like there was a fight for credit, but to hear them talk about it, and to hear them talk about it so much later too, because they both didn't seem to have the level of animosity now talking about it as if they would have talked about it 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting observation. So let's kind of tease that out a bit, because I think you're right. That gives me a different perspective to my initial intro. I would say it adds to the perspective that's also what I loved about this documentary series is not only, like, Jerry Jones, like I mentioned, represents a lot of the modern American kind of arc of time and history and culture. The entire documentary, as you mentioned, does a great job if you watch it kind of with this lens that we're talking about, just showing not only, I would say, the human part of, like you're saying, ego and conflict and who gets credit for things and all that, but it's also in the backdrop of a very, I would almost say, unique and distinct environment of alpha males, but without necessarily the constraints of a system like that's very hierarchical, like the military. Because I'm thinking
or like a big corporate structure or existing corporate structure. Yeah, that's a good point.
Exactly. So like, because I'm thinking like, okay, if I'm a general and I'm leading guys in the Delta Force and the Navy SEAL, like that's a group of alpha males, and there's a hierarchy and all that, but that's a very structured situation. And like you said, corporate America, same thing. But a football team is very interesting because, at least at the beginning, now it might be different, but at the beginning, the cash cow for Jerry Jones was the oil well. Like you said, the Cowboys was something he desired and he loved, but it was a speculation. It was speculative. He didn't know that it would be worth what it's worth today.
Well, yeah, then just to kind of say it a little differently, at that time, if you go, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even to the 90s, professional sports teams were not seen as ways to make money. They were seen as though they were like luxury purchases. Like, hey, you could buy a boat, or you could buy the pro sports team in town, and you can have that to play with, or you can get into any restaurant, and so you're a big deal in town. But it's not like, oh yeah, this is driving revenue for me. It wasn't seen as that until more recently, with the way.
Let's definitely revisit that, because I know we want to talk about some of the other, the impacts of the NFL and all that now in today's era. But I'm just thinking on this theme of the ego, because think about what Jerry Jones takes a risk at taking his personal capital and buying the team and all that. But unlike we're saying like about the military and even some examples of corporate America, he's got to attract talent, and that means money. So he's also paying people millions of dollars, and they have their own egos, right? Jimmy Johnson, like you said, was the top college coach, winning championships. And then you got players who themselves were the top players. So you've got all this hierarchy of male egos, and how do you keep that all within a kind of a system to achieve a shared goal? And that's why I agree with you. Like, one of the things that stuck out that just from my notes and mention is that I think the first Christmas party that Jimmy Johnson threw for the team, no player showed up because that's how much they disliked at the time his style of coaching.
And then to your point, they started winning. Yeah, this is before.
That's what I was just going to say. And then they ended up winning. He was
driving them really hard, and it wasn't paying off yet. Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying is that's to me just. And I hand it back, and we keep going, but. I feel like the documentary did a good job of showing that dynamic between this kind of interpersonal plays between everybody. I think that was well done.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it didn't hide from that stuff, and rightfully so, because that's the most interesting stuff. Like, seeing it for kind of the general arc of the football would not have been as interesting,
Right. But that's to me why it was so interesting, actually, as a
yeah. Like I said, you were over here telling me, "Oh man, you got to watch." I'm like, "Look, man, what are you talking about? I know what happened," But I would say yes, seeing the interpersonal stuff was worth it. I mean, and honestly, the next thing I wanted to get to actually was whether there were individuals in the documentary that was particularly notable to you, or their stories or anything like that. And for me, I mean, I was a fan of Michael Irvin at the time. Like, I was playing, high school football at the time, and I was a receiver, and it's like, oh yeah, Michael Irvin's the man, yada yada yada. And he's well known, as like at that time, and then like he's a wild guy. Like, this is the guy who embodied work hard and play hard. Work harder than everybody else and play harder than everybody else. And I think that came through in the documentary, like, to the extent that it was like, yeah, that was Michael Irvin, and he's very honest even to this day. Like, he's being interviewed, he's very honest about his what he may call shortcomings now, but at the time it was just like him, like the wildest party guy out there, and like, so to me, the story, like his story within the documentary, even though I knew broad strokes of it in terms of like the criminal issues or the drug issues or the girl issues and stuff like that, seeing it and seeing him talk about it and seeing that stuff unfold in the documentary was very interesting still. I mean, because I guess that stuff is just compelling stuff to see this guy who is at the top of his profession and works harder than anybody else. So, like, one of the things nobody could ever question about this dude was how hard he's working. He's working harder than everybody. But then once the game is over, this dude is partying harder than everybody else too. And I mean, that just. So what about yourself? Like, was there any other than I guess Jones? Like characters.
Well, let's stay on Irvin. That's because Michael Irvin was he made a quote, which I won't verbatim get it right, but it was something to the effect of like that I don't know the quote exactly, but it was like that. Basically, he's like that all the time. That's what he said about himself. At least
hard,
when he was younger,
super hard. Yeah,
that's what I mean. At least when he was younger, he looked pretty calm now as in the interviews when he's older. But I'm just saying, like, his point was saying that the reason why he played like that is because that's who he was inside. And I felt like that's another example of kind of the dual-edged nature of personalities. What makes you successful in one area can be a detriment in other areas. Yeah. And we see that a lot with, not only people we see on TV, but even our personal life. We can all maybe point to a friend or a family member who's very talented, maybe gifted in dealing with people or talking a certain way, but maybe talking too much or dealing with that in other parts of their life gets them in trouble at certain times too. So that's what I found interesting about someone like him, Michael Irvin. I would say the Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson relationship from the whole arc was, to me, very interesting and special. The fact that they were college roommates on the same football team in Arkansas, I didn't know that, just again. But then to see that they both lived long enough, and this is a spoiler to someone who hasn't watched it and doesn't know the story, they both lived long enough to make amends. And I thought about it because I was thinking, like, God forbid, what if one of them had cancer 20 years ago or something, and just passed away, and they didn't have a chance to, mend that fence between each other as human beings. And it looked very special in the last episode when they did that. So to me, that stuck out a lot. And then the last I'll say is the coach that replaced Johnson. His name was Barry. I can't remember the last name. Switzer. Yeah. The story about his mom when she committed suicide, him having to carry her to her bed and all that. I felt like, man, that's interesting when you go through something like that at a young age. And maybe that's why the way he was with the players, because the players discussed him and Johnson in their contrast of coaching. But I like the way the documentary showed the love that the players had for both of them. And Irvin had a quote.
In different ways.
Yeah, because Irvin said, Jimmy will ride you, Barry will trust you. And it's just because I've been playing basketball, I played for different coaches like that too. And it's, they're different, but both styles can bring something good out of,
and what's interesting about that also is just kind of the order of it as well. Like the guy who molded everything was Johnson, the guy who rode everybody. And then after everybody's kind of molded, they won twice. The guy who kind of, and to be fair, Switzer was and had been retired, like supposedly in the 70s and 80s, he was a rider too, but he kind of had mellowed out to a degree. He was out of coaching, wasn't looking to get back in when he got hired. And, interestingly enough, like in this, we won't go into this, but he was kind of the first of the Cowboys haven't had this level of success since the mid 90s. And the part of what a lot of people say is that Jerry Jones, after the Jimmy Johnson experience, when Jimmy Johnson was saying, hey, I did this, and Jerry Jones was like, hey, this is my team, he wouldn't hire another coach that would say, hey, this is my thing. He hired coaches that would subordinate themselves to him more so. So Barry Switzer might have been the first of that. They got one more championship out of it. And then since then, the Cowboys haven't done anything. The other thing I'll mention about Irvin, I do want to keep us moving though, was his example though, was a different one of ego in the sense that while we talked about the hard charging part, and professionally and personally, he also was an alpha amongst alphas in the sense that he wasn't intimidated by other big time talents, big time personalities. One of the things that was very interesting was the Cowboys for that last Super Bowl, they went out and signed Deion Sanders, who one of the most talented athletes of all time, and also one of the guys who will tell you that he's the most talented out there. In fact, in the documentary, he's like, "Yeah, I was it." Like that's his quote. And so like when they're thinking about doing this, they're like, "Well, what's Irvin going to think?" Irvin's Irvin's our leader, one of our leaders, and he's everybody walking around like, "Hey, I'm the man" type of thing walking around. How's he going to feel about if we bring Deion in? Because Deion takes a backseat to no one, and so but. Deion and Irvin had this mutual respect. Irvin's like, hey, if we can get Deion, bring him in, like that type of thing. So his approach, his mindset was one of not being intimidated by having somebody else. Because Deion's going to come in and be Deion and say, hey, this is all about me. Yeah. Irvin was just saying, hey, this is all about me. But those guys both were so driven as far as the ultimate success that they were cool with having each other right there. Whereas, again, the Jimmy Johnson and Jerry Jones example doesn't illustrate that same kind of mentality. Yeah. They're not both, like, to them, the credit and the kind of acknowledgement was on par with the success, or at minimum thinking they took it more for granted that they could have it. And I can just hire. What was Jerry Jones's quote was, there's 500 coaches that could win with the team that we have here. And Jimmy Johnson was like, well, I put that team together, and then no, 500 couldn't. So the dynamic that they touched on with Irvin and Sanders, Deion Sanders, like that, those guys were cool having each other right there, even though in different personalities of people of that talent and that, kind of assertiveness might conflict, Yeah.
Now, and the last thing, and then I know we want to keep it moving, I'll say is Deion Sanders, he said something, and it wasn't, I think, a big standout line in the documentary, but it hit me because I appreciated it, especially from him, because he's a type of athlete that I think is a throwback to, I think, since Muhammad Ali and every generation since, we've had some athletes that have been seen as a little bit more flashy, louder in their mouth, all that kind of stuff. And sometimes that becomes
but there's the key piece of that. Nobody can doubt their talent or their work ethic like they are at the top and they will.
Well, that's where I'm going. So that's so. But we look at that as, that's a caricature. It's a again, American entertainment, loves it, right? It's from Barnum and Bailey and that stuff back. And that's those times we like that kind of entertainment. But he said something very specific, which was that he studied and researched more than anyone else. And in terms of game film, and the actual game. And I thought, that's something we don't actually give a lot of these, like you're saying, the greatest athletes a lot of credit for. We say that they have this natural prowess and natural this and that, which is true in a certain thing. But the reason why not everybody gets to their point is also the intelligence side. I mean, if you look at whether Deion Sanders, Michael Jordan, whoever is at the top, Tiger Woods, they are very intelligent and they are students of what they do. And I think that was something I appreciated that Barry Sanders said. It wasn't just that I was born fast. He was like, I also am fast, but I study. Like it's a combination,
Well, let me, because I think, and then like for another example, a more contemporary example is LeBron James. And people talk about his contemporaries, talk about how he's like a computer brain in terms of understanding what's going on and studying and, hey, here's what's about to happen and so forth. And I think that a lot of times that's more about us than them, though, because a lot of times we people want to feel like they are there not because of hard work, but because just some natural ability that we don't have. But what a lot of people, it's not why anybody couldn't get there. It's why there are there are a number of supremely talented people, but only a few make it to the very top. And that's what separates it out. The guys who were supremely talented, just as talented as Jordan or just as talented as LeBron or whatever like that, or football from Deion, just as talented as Deion, who didn't have the focus, didn't have the discipline, didn't have the intelligence, all that stuff. Those guys we just don't hear about, even though they were just as talented. Yeah. So it's not that anybody could have got there, but the people with that talent, there's still a separator. And Deion had one of, Deion was one of those guys that separated. Irvin was one of those guys separated. His work ethic amongst the talented people was, a 99%, so he was able to take the talent, and then other people might have had that talent too, but he got more out of it because of that work ethic. So the last thing I want to talk to you about, both explicit and implicit in the documentary, is that the Cowboys are NFL's most popular team, America's team or whatever. And what we also know as far as NFL entertainment properties go, like right now in the modern era, the NFL is by far the most popular thing we have going in entertainment. And I say entertainment because, again, television, going to a show, or which is a game or whatever, like it may be a competitive based thing, but it is an entertainment property. In 2024, the top 11 program telecasts based on viewership are all NFL games. And it's like 15 of the top 20. Like, so what people are watching on TV, the top 11 telecasts are NFL games. So, and that's a year with the Olympics, it's the NFL is a behemoth from an entertainment standpoint. So what do you make of, we see this soap opera of the Dallas Cowboys, but beyond that, like what do you make of, or do you think there's anything is it the soap opera aspect, or what do you think that makes, Dallas Cowboys the top thing, top NFL team, with the NFL being the top entertainment thing, which would put Dallas Cowboys as kind of probably the most popular thing out there, and that kind of thing. What do you make of that?
And maybe the most valuable sports team out there.
Well, definitely the most valuable.
So there's a lot. I'm sure there's a lot to unpack that we don't even have time.
Yeah, you got to pick and choose.
Because this is, because this is like, to me, as much as I'm a basketball guy first, I got to acknowledge that football is America's game in many ways. I mean, there's an article I know we'll have in the show notes describing the similarity between football and how America conquered the frontier. So, I mean, and that's a whole different discussion, but it's very interesting from a cultural standpoint of what football can represent to a lot of Americans. I think, though, that if we look in the last couple decades, like specifically, this alludes back, and get your thoughts on the book show we did about a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. I think that football and television go well together for many reasons. And I also think that
you had said something to me about that, as far as how football on television.
Yeah, I mean, so we had a private conversation that, and I've said this for years now, that football is the only professional sport that I like to watch on television rather than go to a game. Like, I mean, we live in South Florida for listeners and viewers. So, Miami Heat is the NBA team. I'd rather go to a Heat game than watch it on TV. The Florida Marlins are our baseball team, and the Florida Panthers are a hockey team. I've been to all those kind of games, and to me, it's more enjoyable being in the stadium, watching it live, hearing the cheers and all that, than it is. But football, I find I like being at home on my couch with a big screen, and the sport is so much easier to kind of follow and understand when you're watching from TV. And so, to me, that's what I realize is football is perfect for television. For various reasons, also the limited amount of games, things like that. That's why I think that it's become much more culturally influenced. Yeah.
No. What's very interesting about that is that football, and remember, baseball historically was America's sport. And it happened in the 1970s that football became more popular than baseball, which kind of tracks to what you're saying. Like that, as TV becomes more prominent, then football becomes more popular, and then like as our culture becomes more and more based around TV, football becomes more popular. I think there's something to that for sure. Like I had never thought of that.
Think about it, James, the concept of a pastime, right? America's pastime was baseball when it was people went outside.
When people went to there's 82 or 81 home games every year. You can go in the evening, yada yada. No, I get you.
Yeah.
What's also
and now
interesting
America's pastime is once a week on Sunday.
Well, but that's also there's a congregation element to that too. I think that the flows of football really lends itself to following in our modern society. Like there is, because there's a game once a week, there's enough time to talk about to gossip about what just happened and then to build up for what's about to happen every week. So I actually don't think it's about the actual game as much as I think it's about the way the way that the game is played schedule wise sets up and fits into our kind of, our ecosystem. Because if it was about the game, then whenever it was invented, it would have been more popular. But it's like, hey, the way our information ecosystem operates, our entertainment ecosystem operates, it seems like it fits with us. Movies are released, on a Friday, and so the weekend you can go see a movie or, football games and so forth. I mean, it's not lost on me also that generally speaking, college football is the second most popular sport, which again has that same week to week kind of periodic. Hey, we play a game, college football, you play on Saturday, NFL junior, you play on Sunday, but then you can talk about what happened on Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, talk about what's about to happen. So you build anticipation. One of the things I know about basketball, I follow basketball, and I'm like, a game happens, you don't really have time to think about what just happened because there's another game in a day or two. And it's like, okay, we got to just keep going. So it doesn't lend itself to kind of building up to the next event, building up to the next big event. And so I think that the periodic nature of football really fits with the way our society likes to consume things. And then I think they've done a good job of doubling down on that. So, I mean, I think, and this is evident, like we talked about the growth in franchise values, like Jerry Jones bought the team for $100-something million, in the late 80s. The team is valued, well north of 10 billion now. And that's a long period of time, right? Well, just even in the last 10 years, it's gone from being valued in the less than 5 billion range, less than 3 billion range. If you go back to 2014, stuff like that might be about valued at 2 billion. And now it's at 12. And it's like, well, geez, 10 years, like that's talk about appreciation.
Let's track other assets, though. I mean, think about the growth of billionaires and the people at the top. Like when we did a show that, what was it? Elon Musk was worth about less than 10 billion in 2010.
Well, but I think you can't look at him you can't look at the outlier. We'd have to look at the kind of average from that standpoint.
No, what I'm saying
the Cowboys aren't an outlier as far as NFL franchises.
No, but what I'm saying is people who already owned assets that could increase in value, like in the last decade, 20 years, because of just what's happened in the economy and the way things have played out, owning a sports team, because like you told me about the Suns and certain other teams too that have Celtics that have sold for just these multiples that would have seemed unrealistic just 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I think you have a good way of saying it. What is it that the wealthy just trade assets among, the people at the top are kind of just trading assets amongst each other.
The things they buy are we think we have bad inflation.
Yeah, exactly.
They're buying, the inflation's even crazier. But I'm not shedding a tear for that. It's just again, just paying attention. Like to me, that's more evidence of the wealth imbalance we have. Is just that, the wealthy people are so much more wealthy now than historically they had been if you go back 20, 30, 40 years. So, but I think that beyond the franchise value, the fact that this is something that on an increasing basis is the thing that can get people's attention really matters as we move forward. And so the Cowboys documentary itself, or this documentary on the Cowboys itself, was a window looking back into the past, but it also kind of is a launch point for the future. Like many would say that this was Jerry Jones's kind of image play. Like he wants to create a legacy in the public's mind about himself. And he did this in order to build himself up to the public, which, again, that's his right. I'm not going to say whether I think that's right or wrong, so to speak, because I can't get in the guy's head. He does come across as if you watch this without much background on it, he does come across as a very sympathetic person, or as a person that just like, oh yeah, I like this guy, so to speak. So if that was his goal, I'd say he probably succeeded. But in any event, before we close it out, I just wanted to ask you, so takeaways, your final takeaways, just kind of, was there anything that you think will stick with you about this, before we get out of here?
Jerry Jones, the reason why he's such an interesting character to me is because that to me, as a guy that didn't see all this at the time and that came into this documentary with no real opinion, I still couldn't get past the fact that at 82 years old, he's still the GM of the team.
Yeah.
So it shows this, again, this dual thing. Correct. Like what probably did get him successful was being a control freak in a certain way. But to your point about they haven't won a Super Bowl in 30 years almost. So the fact that he can't let go, and at 82, he's still got to be the general manager of the team trying to direct traffic, is, again, it shows that humanity, the dual-edged sword of him. So to me, that was interesting. And the last takeaway I'll say is, as I looked it up out of curiosity, that the football is so popular. Soldier Field is the smallest stadium in the NFL, and it holds 61,000 people. And as a basketball fan, that's crazy to me because I think the biggest basketball stadium outside of college.
Well, if they play basketball games once a week and there were only 17, they might be able to do that,
Dude, if a basketball stadium could hold 100,000 people, the nosebleed seats, they couldn't see the game.
That's true. And they do that sometimes, like with the Final Four and stuff. I'll say this. The biggest takeaway I had was actually that the story is very common. I just think the characters in this case were very interesting, and that's kind of a fluke in a sense, and then in a sense it's not, like the Irvins, the Emmitt Smiths, the Troy Aikmans, all of these guys are interesting characters, like and Jones and Jimmy Johnson, like Charles Haley, like these are some of them are crazy, some of them are, but they're all interesting. But I always think about, when I look at this, what it reminded me of, and this is something we could see, like if you could look at the Los Angeles Lakers in the 1980s, which is the quote I'm about to is from Pat Riley, who was the coach then of the Lakers in the 80s. He's been an executive, he's a coach and then an executive with the Heat more recently. He has something called the disease of more. And that is what happens after you succeed with, in sports, basically. And I think you can expand it out to sports, and that's literally what we saw unfold here. Like the disease of more. Once you win, then everybody starts wanting more. Like, oh, I want a bigger role, or I want more money, or I want more credit and stuff like that. And so it's something that is not unique to the Cowboys, but seeing it play out with the Cowboys was very interesting because the characters themselves, they're pretty open. So they're not all hiding this stuff behind the vest, like they're kind of open about this stuff. And so we get to see kind of this common narrative play out because they're so open and they let us in, so to speak. So to me, that's what really the biggest takeaway I had is that it's not that this stuff never happens. It's that these guys are telling us about it and showing us, so to speak, more so than us just it getting reported on. And because, again, it's pretty common, so much so that, Riley has a name for it, and I'm not the only person who's ever cited that disease of more thing. So, but all in all, it was pretty interesting, again, to see this kind of this common narrative and to see it play out through such interesting characters. So, but I think we can wrap from there. Yeah. We appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
I am Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk soon.